video, we'll show you 3 things that you must do in order to transcend the third dimension. I'm going to share with you ways of increasing your level of consciousness so that you're able to perceive from a higher point of view. Welcome back to another video. My name is Aaron and I help people expand their consciousness. Now this video is going to be a little bit more esoteric than some of the other videos that I did and have done. This one's going to be on understanding the different dimensions, and it's a more general understanding because there's always debates when it comes to dimensions and the idea of densities and what's the difference. Now I'm going to be explaining it from the conditioned way of how we look at the idea of the third dimension, because we could say that the third dimension is actually the fourth dimension because you have 3 of space and 1 of time. But just to give it a general basis, I'm going to say the third dimension in this video. Now the idea behind this is, first off, that every dimension that exists right now in the present moment, that we can perceive from any point of view. However, it depends on what's relevant for our level of consciousness and what's relevant from our own perspectives. So sometimes people think that the dimensions are an actual place, whereas it's more so a perception, because people say, oh, you know, on the planet we're transcending from a majority third dimension type place in order to a 5D type place. Now the idea behind this isn't so much that it's a different place as much as it's a different realm of consciousness. Now let me explain a little bit of the difference between the third dimension and what we would call the 5th dimension, or fundamentally we could say the 4th dimension and the 5th dimension if we're including the 1 of space and the 3 of time. Now the idea behind this is that dimensions can be thought of as certain thought perceptions, certain perspectives, and when we are in what is called duality, that is more so the idea of the third dimension or the 4th dimension. The idea behind this, and you can think of this in the form of being identified with the head. We have the left brain, the right brain, we have polarization. This is where we get into good and bad, light and dark. That's when we're in what is called the third dimension. That is from the perspective of things being polarized, of us creating one thing, and if we create it from that space of the left brain, right brain, we create it from the head, many times it will be polarized. That's why if you're focused on what you do want, but you feel like you don't have it, you may experience the opposite of that. You may experience not having it. That's because of polarization. Now, think of this in the form of, if you want to transcend the third dimension, you must be able to get rid of duality and thinking and being identified with that duality. So that's what I like to do on this channel, is I like to break down these woo-woo ideas and make them something that's very applicable, something that's very practical that we can relate to, and that's why I always use analogies like this. Think of this in the form of duality. Our brain has a left brain, a right brain, and when we transcend it, that is when we get into more of 5D consciousness. Now 5D consciousness is also heart consciousness. It's when you're able to not identify with the brain and you're able to get more into your heart and you're able to have more of what is called unity consciousness. Unity consciousness is when you have the awareness that we are all connected, that we are all one. And when you start to really tap into that, you start to see that all of this war, all of these fighting, all of this identification is kind of ridiculous. Maybe not in a judgmental way, but maybe in a way where it's like, oh, you see, it's not necessary. Like, imagine if you knew that the people on the planet were all other versions of themselves, and they're all bickering and fighting and killing themselves over ideas, over some type of thought that comes from the left brain, the right brain, that comes from the mind, which is polarized. Imagine if you saw that. You'd be like, whoa. You're coming, you know, not in a judgmental way, but you'd be like really aware that they are fighting other versions of themselves. That's why what you put out is what you get back. Because at the deepest level, we are all connected. So when you do something to someone else, you're doing it to another portion of yourself. Now I know that's kind of a deep idea, but it's very powerful for understanding that we're all connected, that anytime somebody does something wrong to you, they're doing it from their own level of consciousness, and we can see that they're doing it for their own reasons. They've rationalized it in their own mind. It makes it so much easier to let go of that 3D type, this person did it to me, that person did it, and we can kind of start to get into this more of observation point of view, which is where all the power is. Now, the first thing that we must do to completely transcend the third dimension has to do with letting go of duality, of letting go of identification with the thought processes we have, with letting go of the left brain, the right brain, and all this polarization, and understanding that we can get to a more neutral state of being. Now, this for me was a huge change in my whole vibration and the whole way that I feel about myself, and this happened when I learned meditation, because I learned how to not necessarily try to control my mind. I learned instead how to observe my thoughts and to let them be there. Awareness is where all this power is. You will transcend the 3D vibrations that may be feeling like they're holding you down by just simply learning how to observe your own thoughts. Learn how to observe your thoughts, because when you do, you take out the electrical charge that's kind of insinuating that type of polarization, and you start to tap into a much deeper place and a deeper part of who you are. Start to observe things. Like right now, you could observe the thoughts in your mind. You may be thinking to yourself, what am I going to eat here in about half an hour? Instead of thinking, what am I going to eat in the next half an hour? Observe that. What am I going to eat in the next half an hour? That's what I'm thinking right now. What you begin to do is you observe the thought processes you have, and by observing it, you're not charging it as good or bad. Therefore, you are raising out of that level of consciousness, and you're existing in that higher perspective. Now, the second thing that you must do in order to transcend the third dimension is to let go of all victimization. Now, this is where forgiveness comes in. This is where you really learn how to let go of the lower vibrations. There's a scale that I always show. Maybe I'll pop it up here for a minute. From the book called Power versus Force, that shows the different levels of emotions with the different levels of consciousness. And what you can begin to see is the bottom levels, from the shame, guilt, all the lower emotions, up to about willingness, maybe even neutrality, is what we could consider the third dimension. Neutrality is when you start to pump into the higher dimensional points of view, which could be the 4D or 5D. So think of this in the way of love. When you get to love and neutrality, that is the fifth dimension. That's where we're able to see the connection between all of us, and that's when we transcend all the lower emotions. Now, a lot of the perspectives we have of victimization are in the lower rings of this scale. They are, this person did this to me, and that person did that. And when we learn to observe it rather than react to it, when we come with the awareness that everybody's acting out of their own level of consciousness and out of their own rationalization, it makes it so much easier to forgive. And when we forgive, that's where everything changes. Now, I see a lot of people, and this was me for the first part of my journey back in like 2012 when I was learning all of this. You know, when you learn about parts of the back government and what we could fundamentally call the Illuminati, what we end up doing is we end up giving our power away and saying that they're so much more powerful and that they are able to do all this stuff when we get angry. Well, when we get angry, we are actually feeding into that reality, and we are reaffirming it in the collective consciousness. So what we must learn to do is to not give away our power in victimization, to not have these beliefs that money is horrible, money is ran by the elite and all of these things. When we have those perspectives, they're rooted in the ideas of that lower paradigm and that idea of victimization, and that will keep us entrained in it. So it sounds counterintuitive, because even though you understand that maybe that stuff really is happening, maybe it is, maybe it's not. I'm not saying one way or the other, but what I am saying is it didn't serve me to focus on it, and by me feeding into it, I was actually making that reality much more real. We will always experience in life a reflection of what we believe to be true. If we believe that the world is against us, if we believe that we're being controlled, then we will experience that. Now, you can still have the awareness that some people may be having that experience. You can have the awareness that maybe a lot of things are controlled in the media and all that stuff. You can have that awareness, but not from the point of victimization, not from the point of, I can't believe this is happening, this is horrible, and all the conspiracy theories that are involved. Because a lot of times those will pull us down into the third dimension, even though we have a desire to get out of it. By us emotionally adding energy to it, we are reaffirming that reality for everybody. So the key to this is letting go of that victimization, letting go of those perspectives, and allowing ourselves to first off realize that we are consciousness, and that's when everything begins to change. And that's why the third thing you must do to transcend 3D is to realize that you are an immortal spiritual being having a temporary human experience. A lot of times we flip that around. We think that we're a person having a spiritual experience. It's the other way around. When you come aware of that, you realize the 5 senses to which you perceive your life, the 5 ways that we translate vibration, which is through, seeing, hearing, tasting, feeling, those senses can only interpret a small percentage of what is actually real. But we experience it, so we say, this is all there is in life. This is who I am. I can feel this. This is who I am. Not understanding that our energy body, that our aura, whatever we want to call it, goes far outside of our body. That not only that, we are connected to a higher stream of consciousness that is immortal, that we are immortal spiritual beings having that temporary human experience. And when we start to really tap into this, we start to disassociate and not to give so much power over to the circumstances in our life, because we see that we are so much more beyond just this small experience that we're having right now. Now, this can be very empowering, because then from a certain perspective, we're not so caught up in the rat race. We're not so caught up in the web that we create for ourselves. We're more so aware that there are things we can do to raise our own vibrational state, that we can start to perceive things from a higher point of view, and that seed is planted with the awareness that you are an immortal spiritual being having a temporary human experience, that you came to earth at this time, that when we come here, we forget who we are through social conditioning. We forget who we are with the purpose and the intention of waking up. That's when we call it a spiritual awakening. When we unlearn all this social conditioning, when we allow ourselves to wake up to who we really are, which is this immortal spiritual being having a temporary human experience, that's where everything begins to change. Life becomes much more rich, and we can start to then stretch outside of our ego with our identification with form, with our identification with thinking that we are the ego. And that's why observation is so powerful. That's why we can become aware of this level of perspective, and we can start to reconnect with who we really are. And as we reconnect, everything begins to change. So the 3 things you must do involves, first off, transcending duality, not getting caught up in good and bad, more so observing more so than anything else. Understanding that as we allow ourselves to let go of all these old paradigms, as we allow ourselves to understand that we are an immortal spiritual being having a temporary human experience, everything begins to change. And as we let go of victimization and perspectives that make us feed into that reality that we don't serve, as we let that go, we will start to transcend ourselves in a very powerful way. Now, what I've created just now is a new way that we can apply raising our own vibration. It's a meditation that will allow you to raise up the vibrational scale of that scale that I showed to completely transform your level of consciousness. It's something I recommend you listen to for at least 21 days to get the max results out of it, preferably even longer than that, to really wire it into your subconscious mind and allow you to feel in that high vibes place. So you can download that in the description box below. It's a meditation that will allow you to raise your vibration in a very powerful way and to transcend your current level of consciousness. So with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Feel free to like this video if you guys liked it, subscribe if you haven't already. Also hit that little notification bell so that you can see the daily vids that I do. The way YouTube does things now is you actually have to hit that button in order to see the daily vids. And other than that, as always, I will see you guys on the next vid. Peace, much love, and namaste.